I'm having is usually the anatomy part. So if you can come a little bit forward towards Edward, because it is a bit hard to see things if you're so far away. Can you hear me okay in that volume? Yeah, it's okay the way I speak? Okay. So we are having the pleasure today to introduce the shoulder. I'm going to do the anatomy as I said. Don't laugh, I feel self-conscious. What? That's not a bad thing, is it? I've never worn anything like that. I feel like, oh yeah, I can hear it now. Okay, and Danielle and Simon are going to do the more involved Feldenkrais stuff. So when you think of the shoulder joint, where would you put your hand and show me where the shoulder joint is? Quickly. It's quite interesting to see. Yeah, some of you go all around and some of you just put your hand there. So, and generally when you talk to the public, they are thinking, when they think of the shoulder joint, they think here. So, which is here. The shoulder is not simple. It consists out of different parts, different joints. But this part, this is the humerus, so the arm bone. This is the head of the humerus. And this is the glenoid fossa. So that is similar to a hip joint, but as you can see, you know, the hip joint here, this is a very big bowl-like receiving end, while here, this is very, very small. So what this does, on the positive, it gives us lots of room to move because nothing is restricting it. But on the negative, it is easily damaged if all the other bits don't work properly. Around here though, and which you will see later on the video, there is some cartilage called the labrum, which just makes that cup a little bit bigger. So holds the head of the humerus in. There's lots of ligaments and tendons holding the arm in too. Then there is, here you got the acromion, here you got the collarbone, and here, as you have already experienced, the collarbone is attached on the sternum. So all this has to move together. This is all held together by ligaments. And the most important part now. So they are considered still part of the shoulder girdle and the whole shoulder movement. The acromioclavicular joint here, the glenohumeral joint, and the sternoclavicular joint being here. But, which is not a really considered a joint, is the scapula, the shoulder blade. When you look at here on the skeleton, it all looks just floppy and with a few little bits holding it together. But as you know already, this has to move over the rib cage. You got very strong muscles holding the shoulder blade against the rib cage. And then what we have addressed this week, these little bits, you know, could be part of the trapezius, which is a very strong muscle. We have used that when we were moving this up. So that's basically the movement. So the stringy trapezius here relaxes and the shoulder blade has to move. The acromioclavicular joint has to move, and very much the sternoclavicular joint. So that all mobilizes everything. Just thinking if we should go to the
video,
to the first video.
Yeah.
So all very complex. I might just quickly do this on the skeleton, but it will be better on the video. When you move your arms a certain amount, like up to here, the shoulder blade doesn't move. When you have to move further, your shoulder blade has to rotate. So a big part, because you've got all these all these bony prominences here. So at some stage you end up with bony limitations. And it's very hard to show on him, but we'll better see on the video that there is a point where, like I said, the scapula comes in, and there's also a point where you impinge each other here. So the humerus has to rotate in here. That's called the glenohumeral rhythm. And then you got the scapular humeral rhythm. So they need to work really in conjunction with each other. If one doesn't work, it affects the other. And you will see that a little bit more effectively on that little video clip. I found this video clip quite good because what it also shows, and lots of other videos don't show, is it shows you how the collarbone moves and shows you how the ribs move. And some of the videos that just show you that in a very isolated manner. And I think for our purpose, it's really important to see when you lift your arms, your rib cage moves, your breastbone moves. So on the skeleton, that's not the easiest. So here you see the joint capsule.
Do you want the audio?
Oh, let it go. Yeah, I can always add something to it. Yeah, bring it up because it's really good and it's short.
Yeah, this is the guy. Crazy accident.
So I don't know if this is we have got two little clips. One is about 6 minutes, but we're going to fast forward it, and the other one is 1 minute and a bit. I think this one is without the movement of the ribs. So that's what I said, the different parts of the shoulder joint with the ligaments holding the... I can add to it.
It's up to you, Martina.
Yeah, I'll just add to it. You'd see here all the nerves and blood vessels and ligaments and tendons. So you see how crowded this area is. So you have to be careful with whatever you do. And maybe some of you actually experienced when you were lifting that you could feel a bit of tingling in your fingers. If you squash some of these little nerves, then you get a tingling sensations. You know, if you push too hard against your humerus, that can cause tingling sensations. See, this is the axilla, and the white bits are the nerves, the red ones are the blood vessels. Here you see the muscles I've been talking about, which are underneath the shoulder blade, so which help with bringing forward the movement. Blood vessels, see, coming all from the neck. And the white ones are the nerves. This is our deltoid muscles, which helps us bringing out the arm. So we can go a bit further now, yeah. So it is a very complex and easily damaged structure. Bursa you can't see in here, that will come up later. So we said already that's the humerus, the arm bone, the scapula, the shoulder bone, clavicle. Like, it's just a bit better. You can see it better than on the skeleton. So what we've shown on the skeleton, and we talked about, and you can see how flat this is, that the head actually doesn't fit in completely. That's why you got all the ligaments. What we said, sternocleidomastoid, which only got ligaments to hold it in place. So it's a very rigid joint. And the movement of the shoulder blade. It sometimes gets called the scapulothoracic joint, but it's not a real joint. Like I said, it's held together by just muscles. So the cartilage provides the smooth surface. So if you would have bone to bone, it would quickly wear away, and the cartilage is a smooth surface where cartilage is on the head and is in the cup, so it provides a smooth surface for gliding along. And in arthritis, that can get worn away, and then you get inflammation and pain. And some people then they go for shoulder replacement because it's all worn away. Here you will see the ligaments holding everything together, so you can see this, how an important attachment this is for ligament. And the capsule is made by the ligaments holding it in. What we said, the acromioclavicular joint just being quite a rigid joint held together. And seeing again how that coracoid process, how important this is for all the ligament attachment to provide movement. And that's what I was saying, the labrum is enlarging that surface where the humerus can move in. And that can be torn off in like dislocations, the labrum. And often it needs then some screws put in, which I have got in my shoulder, to hold the labrum in again. Because by itself, the cartilage does not really adhere again to the bone. Now you can see what the groove is for in the humerus, and again, how important this attachment is for the both, because biceps meaning two, so do two heads of the biceps, all very smartly organized. And you can see how easily that can be damaged, and it just goes over the head of the humerus. So if you push this up, it can be torn. The rotator cuff being made up by different muscles and tendons, which help you holding the humerus in the cup and give you that movement which you see here. How this is all very well designed. Of course, in this case, the shoulder blade would move already, but they haven't put that in. We already mentioned the axilla. And here it shows you again the nerves. That's why you get the tingling sensation.
Do they touch into the spine and the neck?
They go into the spinal cord. It comes out somewhere in between here. And it all goes through here. So, and if you injure that part really badly, like often in accidents where you fall and on an outstretched arm, then you can lose function of your arm because the nerves and everything gets damaged. So even the nerves come out somewhere here. So. Now you get it all together. And that's what we were first talking about, the bursa you couldn't see. If this bursa wouldn't be in here, it would mean that the muscle glides over bone, and that wouldn't be very smooth. And so there's this fluid-filled sac in between, which helps the muscle glide over it and also stops it impinging bone on bone. And sometimes you have heard probably of bursitis. So when it's an inflamed bursa sac. Simon will go more into movements, but this is just showing in what movements the shoulder is engaged, lifting, carrying, stretching. And the last little short clip is just showing you the scapulohumeral rhythm. What I was saying, there is a certain amount of movement where the scapula doesn't move. And this shows you well how the ribs have to move. So it shows you when the scapula is coming in, when the ribs come in, and the collarbone, how that all moves. Yeah, everything. So it shows you 30 degrees without any involvement. Then the scapula up to horizontal. So all up, it gives you 150 degrees of movement. Up to 180 degrees. There's the different sources. Some of them say it's 150 degrees of movement. Some say up to 180 degrees of movement, which you can achieve because of all the bits moving. And that was the anatomy. I'll pass over to Danielle.
So now that we have that's all work.
I need that bit too. It's got a clip. Yeah. So now that we've used our senses of our sight and our ears with Martina's words and our video, we'll experience that same, we'll hope to find that same awareness through movement and touch. So would you like to find a partner? And come up into standing. So one of you to begin with to be exploring and the other one to be explored. And then after a while we'll swap.
Can we do this in sitting or it has to be standing?
I think it's best in standing, yeah. Unless it's uncomfortable, in which case get a chair. I don't think you can do sit on the floor very easily. Do you want a chair? Do you want a chair with a back? Would you want a chair with a back? Is that okay? All right. So first of all, using the sense of touch. So put your hand on the person's shoulder and do it in that particular way. I'll just demonstrate on Simon. So stand to one side. No, you stand still. I stand to one side. That's it. And lay your hand over the shoulder from the side. And you can feel in the palm of your hand, there's that bony tubercle, it's called. And then between your fingers and your thumb, you can feel this collarbone going off to the front. And at the back, the most prominent thing that you'll be feeling is that rib on the back of the scapula, which sticks out. So you can see just how very wide that is by the time you get to about here. Thank you. This is my ventriloquist. Yeah, so what can we identify easily like that, even in quite muscular people, which makes it harder? Yeah, you've got this very prominent part at the top, the acromion, coming round to the front. And you may also be able to feel just below the collarbone, something very bony and prominent below the collarbone and proximally from the acromion. You can feel this projection, and that's that coracoid process, which Martina was explaining is so important. Holding with ligaments the head of the shoulder in its little shallow cup. And then if you go around to the back of the shoulder, see if you can describe the scapula. Find the edges of the scapula. You'll be able to identify the tip of the scapula down. Behind there. And so if you put one hand on the shoulder and hold it still, then you can start to move the head of the humerus. So leave the shoulder bone itself quiet and move the head of the humerus. Find a way, the easiest way is to move the arm up and down. Just find a comfortable way to do that. One way is to hold the elbow, support the elbow. You might support the elbow from beneath. And the movement that you can see, if the shoulder is still, you can move the arm outwards, leaving the shoulder still. That's the rotation of the head of the humerus in that little cup. And once you've got the elbow like that, you can also feel a rotation. So the person who's being explored, can you start to sense that rotation? So what I'd like you to do is halve the speed at which you're doing that. And then halve it again. And the person whose shoulder's being turned, can you start to sense that rotation? So now, conversely, we'll look at the scapula moving. So just let the arm hang quietly. Find a place where you can get a really good handle on the scapula, where you can put some part of your hand on some part of the scapula, which is probably at the back, where it projects out most. And try to lift the scapula and see if the person can stay still. So that actually what happens is you get a differentiation of the scapula against the rib cage. Another way to do that is to support the elbow and lift the elbow up and down. Once the person's got the idea of just being still, you can feel the differentiation there of the scapula gliding over the back ribs. Do you know what that feels like? Try getting that scapula to glide over the ribs in a forward movement. And so, as we did earlier in the week, a very clear way that you can get a sense of the scapula moving is by putting your hand in the armpit gently, lifting the scapula up. And with the other hand, you can feel where the scapula is moving and dropping it down. Bring it up again and drop it down. Madhavi, would you like to join one of these sets of 3? And just for a moment, pay attention to the different sensation that there was in the movement of the scapula and the movement of the humerus. So now conversely, the person who's being explored, have no constraints, let everything come along together. And the person who's exploring, take this arm and just draw it forwards. You can move your feet, you can move everything, and see what comes along with that shoulder movement and how everything glides together. And again, try and do that very slowly. So as you do it very slowly, which comes along, which joints, all of those joints that Martina described, so you can feel the humerus drawing the scapula. What's happening to the clavicle, to the collarbone? It might go up, it might come forwards. And then obviously the rib cage is moving, the spine starts to move. What about the pelvis, knees, ankles, feet, toes? And now let's look at the freedom of that joint in a vertical plane. So lifting that arm very gently, take it up, and you'll find there's a place where, to go any further, there'll be a sort of twisting of the elbow. Which way does the elbow turn? And perhaps you can sense as you do that, those bony protrusions at the head of the humerus, needing to turn, to slide, and not be impinged. So now, how are we doing for time, Zoran? Fine. What we should do is swap over, but we'll do a different orientation. So lie on the mat. Choose the person who was exploring, now be explored. And lie on your mat and get comfortable on your side. So get enough support under your head for your shoulder to be really comfortable. And the person who's going to explore, make sure the person's comfortable in their knees, perhaps. They might need some padding there. Consider that the angle of your knees where you feel really, really stable. Do you want your knees a bit further up to your chin or further away? Yeah, nothing that you're going to feel that you're going to bump into. Okay, so, and the person who's going to be exploring, are you going to be comfortable? Have you got something to make your knees and your hips comfortable. And find yourself a position where you can explore this joint. Find yourself a way of arranging yourself. That's it. So now we're going to once again explore those elements that we saw on the video. What can you feel? Can you feel the bony protrusions at the top of the humerus, the tubercles, where that nerve slips through that slot, that groove? Well, don't feel the nerve, just feel the bony bits. And can you feel the collarbone? Coming right down to the sternum. And just underneath the collarbone, can you feel the coracoid process? I mean in front of. So actually, yeah, the collarbone, lower, closer towards the feet than the collarbone, but on the front of your body, not on the back. And between the acromion, which is the acromion is the big protruding part at the top of the shoulder joint, you can find a funny little bit sticking out. Yeah, so if you look at this skeleton, for what I was just describing there, that's at the front. So the clavicle you can find, the acromion you can feel, the bony part of the head of the humerus, and then it's just all muscle and all those layers of padding and gliding structures. But you can feel this as well, this bony thing. So, moving around to the back, what you feel at the back is not, as I sort of just imagined before I started learning, that's not actually the top of the scapula. What you're feeling is this bony ridge, which is coming out at a sort of 45-degree angle from the scapula, which is much flatter. But you can also feel this bit very clearly, usually, unless someone's really muscly. Okay, so from that position, let the shoulder structure of the scapula be quiet, and find a way to just allow a little movement of the head of the humerus in that joint. Doesn't have to be a big movement, but supporting the elbow or the forearm is probably a good idea. So again, you'll find you can clearly feel it moving in a differentiated way, forwards and backwards in relation to the person's front and back, and up and down in relation to the person's head and foot, and also naturally to some extent can circle. And if you do it very, very slowly, can the person lying actually start to sense that rotation? And let that go. And now, allowing the arm to be quiet. Let's find a way to move the scapula. Let the scapula glide. Cause the scapula to glide with your hand over the rib cage. And actually, to an extent, you can go along for the ride with this, and it isn't an up and down or a backwards and forwards movement. It's probably more of an arc, probably the diagonal movement. So now, if the person who's lying down would put their hand in standing on the floor in front of them, so that their elbow is pointing up towards the ceiling. That's the sort of way. Now, can you perhaps hold the elbow and explore how the shoulder can move from there? So I don't mean hold the elbow still. You might allow the elbow to swing forwards, swing in front of the person's body, and perhaps down a little bit. And just feel how the shoulder girdle moves in different directions. For instance, there's a place where the clavicle can seem to become almost vertical. And whereabouts is the scapula gliding? Yeah. I think what can happen is that the scapula can allow the shoulder to come quite a long way forwards, and the forearm, which is vertical at the moment, can sort of hinge into different degrees. And then let that go, and the person lying on the floor, drop your hand to somewhere comfortable again. And from a position behind the person, just with a very gentle movement, put one hand on the lower rib cage and the other hand on the scapula, and make a very small movement to differentiate the scapula from the rib cage. So your hands should be moving, or your hands might move to different degrees. And let that go. And person on the floor, drop your knees, come up to standing. and face one another. And just for a moment, notice any difference between the left and the right shoulder. And is there any difference in feeling? So just spend a moment talking to one another about that. And draw that to a close and come and sit around. I'll hand over to Simon, who's going to talk about the shoulder joint in movement in life.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Martina. Good morning, class.
Get down.
Come on, allow me some latitude.
This is the one that's going to be one of those hippie sessions, isn't it, right?
Well, actually. Now, this is actually just a little illustration of what people do with their shoulders when they're having difficulty. Now, is this effective use? Sort of getting the job done, but that wasn't planned. So I want to talk about, okay, so that's all good and well. So what does that mean for us in our lives? We talked a lot about schema in our last segment. So I'm just going to talk actually a little about what interests me about the shoulder, I guess, and hopefully some of that will be interesting for you. But I was thinking about the schema and how our body image affects what we do with our shoulders. So we understand what the range of motion is and what the structure is and what's going on there, and you've just had to play around with it. We've talked a lot about what we can do with the shoulder in terms of reaching, hanging, washing on the line, all this sort of stuff. But what about extreme use of the shoulder or super function of the shoulders as well? How do you throw a ball at 170 kilometers an hour, and what is required of the shoulder to do something like that? Or how do you throw a frisbee 250 meters? And these are things that people can do. And I thought it might be really interesting to have a look at what super function of a joint looks like. And in going there, I thought, well, what else gets in the way of that sort of function? Now, of course, super high function involves a lot more than just the one joint. So I'll have a little bit of a look at that. But
Some of those people get lots of injuries as well.
absolutely, of course they do. But I think what I notice in really amazing examples of athletic performance is, like, the amazing examples manage to limit stress in super high function as well. And it seems to be, and that to me is a very Feldenkrais method idea of where resistance gets incorporated into motion, is where the stress and strain is going to flare up and appear. And so the more that our movements aren't actually having to overcome some other sort of co-contraction or limitation, is where we're going to have more effective and easy function. So even in throwing, I've got a video of this guy who talks about, from his somatic perspective, his personal view, his own viewpoint of how it is that he throws the ball. And then there's a different video, and I won't play both of these, we don't have time, but if anyone's interested, I'll show you. They go 5 minutes or something. I just found them fascinating. One, to have the first person kind of somatic viewpoint, and then an external analysis of the science of how this guy throws the ball, and see where they sort of interlink and combine. Really interesting. So, but what gets in the way? I was thinking about the Becky #3 video that was part of our homework that we had to watch, the Amherst Feldenkrais working on Becky. And in that video, he spends a lot of time with her shoulders. And I don't know if you remember, but he's kind of trying to get her to lie with her shoulder, just able to sort of be at peace on the table. And by the end of it, he does, and he's just working with the shoulder. So that's a really bunched up, kind of contracted shoulder. And that seems to be a thing. Like, she's got CP, but there's a lot of people who carry their shoulders in certain sort of ways that get in the way of super high function. So Thomas Hanna, who I've been reading a lot about and talking to people about in his book Somatics, talks about the withdrawal reflex and the action reflex as two things. So I don't know where that stacks up in contemporary standards. Danielle was challenging me on the idea of reflexes at all as a notion. But for what it's worth, he talks about the withdrawal reflex being something that happens if we receive a fright or some kind of stress, what we do in our system to respond to that, to reflex that. So if this is the natural thing that we do, if we hear a bang or a loud noise, then you can start to see people over the course of a lifetime when they embody that sort of response. And what happens with the shoulders in that is that they come up and they're inclined towards the ears, and they're bunched up. And so some people kind of, that's their experience, and I find that interesting, and where we fit into that and where anyone fits into that, but understanding that. And I was thinking about that in terms of my schema, which occurred to me in the last segment. We were doing some over the head stuff, and I'm naturally kind of more inclined towards extension. I like it, and I'm comfortable with it, and I'm familiar with it. But I was realizing that there's a way of lying on the ground where if you have your shoulders kind of rolled inward, arms can't even come back. And last weekend I was talking to a friend of mine, and he just happened to talk about his himself and his life, and how he was always really tall, and he kind of naturally kind of brought himself into flexion, and how unfortunate it is in his life with his shoulders, he can't actually extend his hands above his head. Now, I know him quite well, and I was looking at him, and I know there's no structural constraint why he can't do that. How interesting. So this is his inclination, this is his reality. He thinks he actually physically can't do this. So you can imagine where my head's going, and all the fun that I'm going to have with him. Not that I'm going to fix him.
You're just going to have fun.
I'm going to have fun, yeah, and I know we don't do that. So, and then the opposite side of that coin is the action reflex, which is what we learn to sort of get out into the world. And Thomas Hanna talks about that as being a dropping of the shoulders and sort of getting ready. So, it's a really interesting quote that I won't read you.
So interesting.
I'm just caring about the time. Oh, that hurt? Oh, do you want to hear the quote? So this is Thomas Hanna. He says, so the shoulder's posterior surface is connected to the neck by the trapezius muscles, and distressful events causing worry cause the reflex of lifting and rounding the shoulders, which is why people with chronic worry often have chronically sore shoulders and necks. If serious worries afflict a human early enough in life, the stooped shoulders will occur early. It is a measure of childhood anxiety to what degree a child's shoulders are slumped and neck contracted. During distressful teenage years, this posture is common. And so just thinking about that, thinking about like a lot of teenage boys in particular, like you really see them, they get all bunched up. So that's, he, like Feldenkrais, uses this ridiculous little wooden model with terrible photography that's badly lit, so you can't actually really see what's going on.
It's arty. Are they having sex?
Oh, wrong one. That's the action reflex, so that's the other one. So he talks about the action reflex as being a downward contraction of the shoulders ready for action. So, turbo-driven shoulders in sport. This took me into an examination of planes of movement and axes, which I personally find really confusing, but really useful. So we have gone over this before. I don't know if it's, I'll just quickly, reason why I want to talk about this is because a lot of shoulder function in sport, particularly in throwing movements, involves the sagittal and frontal planes. So the sagittal being forward back flexion extension. That's the plane, and the axis is so it's going. So you would be bending around that axis or curving around the axis. So the plane is the direction, and the axis is perpendicular. Is that the word?
Yeah, the plane is like a sheet of glass,
Mm.
and the axis is like a ball.
Mm. And so the sagittal transverse is the rotating. So what that looks like in the planes is that, which when I look at that, I go, okay, but what does that mean? And then so they're the directions and the axes. I've got a really good little video, this one, which you can also have a look at later, which we don't have time to play now. But, well, it's 6 minutes, and there's some other videos I want to play you first, and then if we've got time or inclination, we can come back to this. But this guy's awesome, and he draws it all as he's talking about it. Yeah.
Can you put that on the website?
I can put a link to it, yeah. All these videos are ripped, so but I can give them to you. But they're all on, it's all on YouTube, so. Yeah. All the information here, I will make available to all of you. During the task, we're asked to talk about the surrounding joints as well and how they come into play with the shoulder. And so when you think about, the elbow is obviously down the arm. It's the next one along, and it's pretty involved in most things. So push-ups, shot put, throwing a javelin, throwing a ball, obviously that joint is coming into play. And so that's extension of the elbow. And then so flexion of the elbow, we've got pull-ups, drawing a bow and archery. And the universality of the joint really comes into play if you think about something like bowling a ball in cricket, which is deltoids really in play, but because that's arm in full extension. And you've got, like, obviously everything's coming into that motion, which is...
So you can see how important that glenothumeral and the scapulohumeral muscles. Everything has
And what I thought was really interesting in that video as well, showing how the humerus needs to rotate to allow those notches to be able to come around the joint, which is, oh, and by the way, none of us have mentioned, so everything that we've done this week that Zoran has done with us is actually a prelude to this session. So, so thanks, Zoran. It was really helpful. I'm going to go there. So adduction of the shoulder with forehand drive in tennis, which is this motion. And then the butterfly stroke in swimming. What do I want to say about that? Adduction and extension. So that's, and when you think about those exercises we were doing with the dying swan. Can you give us an example of that? And in one of our last segments as well, we were doing a lot of, we were playing with those hand movements. Do you remember? Keeping palms facing up, just almost like qigong kind of exercises, or tai chi, bagua kind of thing. Lots of spirals, lots of shoulder movements. So, what does it look like to throw a ball 170 kilometers an hour? Actually, this one on this one. Password.
You just hit the space bar. I'll return it, sorry.
Oh, it's easy to hack. Drew's son. Where is he? Check this out. Let's see if we can get some volume for it. No, this is film. This is shot at 1,000 frames per second. So it's kind of breaks down all the elements. So we talk a lot about our whole body and whole body use. So this is everything in play. So if you want to throw a ball that fast, yes, your shoulder is the primary thing, but everything is in play here. And you'll notice like the role of the pelvis in it is just fundamental and pivotal.
Oh, wow.
So the angle of rotation on the arm, like this is incredible. So that's him, and you'll appreciate this one. this is a softball pitch. This one looks amazing as well. She's 5'5". Oh no. Come on. All right. That's really disappointing. Moving on. So, I wonder if I'll put it somewhere else. So, okay, what I want to talk about that is the role of the pelvis. So we talk a lot about the pelvis and how the pelvis is influenced by our shoulders, and conversely how our shoulders are influenced by the pelvis. So what's in these Aroldis Chapman videos, it really talks about differentiation of pelvis and shoulder girdle, and how the angles there are what allow for powerful movement. And in this softball pitch, that was at play as well. However, in this one, where the pastor uses the invisible power of Jesus to knock people down, and so he doesn't really have much pelvis in his action. It's much more shoulder. He's still able to knock down everyone. So if you imagine that baseball guy using the power of the Holy Ghost to knock people over, I reckon it'd be far more effective than this guy. He's really quite limited. It goes on for a bit. Yeah, I talked about the javelin before. Spear throwing is interesting. Well, yeah, if you want to talk about native spear throwing, it depends which culture, I guess, and whether they're using a, what are they called? The woomera, yeah, which gives increased, and I just want to show you these guys. So I mentioned throwing a frisbee. So this is the world champion flying disc golf player, and on the left and on the right, it's Brodie Smith, who's one of the most illustrious ultimate frisbee players. So ultimate's the field sport that's really, really fast and played with the conventional style frisbee, and frisbee golf's played with a flying disc golf disc, which is low profile, the same weight, but travels a lot further, and it's not designed to be caught. So
Oh, you just happen to have one.
I play these sports. So this is a ultimate disc, which is a familiar frisbee with the concentric rings, and this is a disc golf disc. So you can see it's the same weight, they're 175 grams. One of these hits you in the head, you really know about it. And so these are made for super long distance, and these are made for catching, right? But you can still get them to go a long way.
They don't come back if you don't hit something.
You can make them come back. Yeah, you can do a lot of things with a frisbee. They're actually not called frisbees; they're called flying discs. That's a trademark name. It's like rollerblades and inline skates, or a Xerox or a photocopy. So again, just the whole body, the role of the pelvis. And this is, you notice, as opposed to the baseball pitch, this is a backhand move. So it's the other side of the body. Two different sports, but pretty much the same action. See how the guy on the left has got more of, he's on the horizontal plane, and Brody on the right is really dipping down on that sort of lateral 45-degree angle. That's because of the function of the two discs. These are designed, if they're thrown on that angle, they will correct themselves and go horizontal, whereas these got a whole different sort of flight aerodynamic property. And they're weighted in different ways, just like golf clubs. So you get +1 to +1, 2, 3 up to 9, and -1, 2, 3 up to 9, and depending on those numbers, they'll fade or drift with a horizontal thrown disc. So that brings to a close my presentation. Like I said, I have those really interesting videos on that a different guy, Roldus Chapman. But he's interesting as well. So he doesn't even speak English. He's I don't know where he's from, maybe Puerto Rico or something. A lot of the American but professional baseball players are from South America, and they don't speak English. And it's really interesting system, how it works. So he talks through an interpreter about what he's doing, and then you get this like sports science guy talking about the elements that enable him to throw the way he does. So,
Question one. Any
Question.
question we can answer?
Which means we covered everything really lucidly.
Oh, those nerves you were talking about. Those nerves you were mentioning before, are they that go under the axilla? Are they connected to the thoracic or to the cervical?
Depends a little bit, but I don't know exactly. I must say I don't know exactly, but I know some of them come out around C7, so the cervical 7, and C6, but there's different nerves come out at different levels, but I would have to look it up to really see, but they do come up out in the neck area and come through here. So that's why people often, when their neck is not in good condition, they perceive pain down their arms. So because things get squashed either between the neck, but it could get, of course, squashed somewhere around here because there's lots of muscles and tendons, and if everything is tight, it can cause pain. Any other question?
Oh, also, sorry, in closing, I forgot this bit. ATMs that involve the shoulders. So I've got a list here, and this list is certainly not exhaustive. But just quickly from the ATM book, lessons 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 12 are pretty heavy on the shoulders. And essentially, I think you could say all of the lessons involved, I mean, they're just so central, aren't they? But in particular, lesson 5, coordination of the flexor muscles and of the extensors, that's really about the shoulder girdle. All the dead bird variations that were done, clearly. Spiral to stand from the elusive obvious, which actually involves a dead bird, but it's various shoulders. Alexander Yanai 3, 4, 5. Remember that one? Diagonal image, differentiation of the arm, the chest-like jelly thing that we were doing last segment or 2 segments ago. And the ones Zoran's been doing with us, which are Esalen ones, and Amherst ones from the Amherst training. So I've got those numbers here because Zoran gave them to me the other day. So you don't need the list of the ones from the ATM book because we all have that and you're all across that. But if you want to jot down these other things, you may from my notes. But I would imagine we're all equally across this stuff because all I've listed to you is things that we've actually done in class. So.